browser. All right, welcome everyone to another webinar from PALCUS, hosted by PALCUS, and this is part of our Science in the Media series with Dr. Belinha Debreu and Dr. Vitor Tomé. This is our fifth in the series, and it's been, all of them have been just a wealth of information, and we will be writing up a summary of all of them and sharing it with you in a newsletter, because this information we have been sharing is really so important to help us understand how to make sense of what we read and see in the media, and then also how we have discussions with each other and not, disown our family members and things like that. And so our final episode, or our final in the series, is going to focus on the climate.
Yeah.
And how do we talk about climate? And, things are certainly changing, as they do naturally over the course of the life of the earth.
Yeah.
But, to what extent is are humans really having an impact? And, it's a contentious subject. So anxious to see what you'll be talking about. So take it away.
Sure. So thank you. Yes, this is our fifth one in the media literacy series, and we wanted to end with the climate. Perfect timing, because April, May, June, we're in this time, and boy, if we had climate to talk about. In the Northeast, we had the fires, which I know has usually been an issue in California, where you are, Angela, and certainly in Portugal. The summertime always brings these unbelievable fires because of the heat and really the shift of the way in which we see the world. So what we wanted to address in this series is, how has the media been part of the global conditioning that we see, believe, or disbelieve, especially when it comes to climate change? And this is a topic that is also contentious in families, which I always find really interesting, even though we are living in the changes and seeing it happening. And so as follow-up to that is, what can be done as a Portuguese community to contribute, helping so we can provide a better life for our families, and in doing so, the world. And I think that besides the climate, I think media literacy in general is about that. How do we make the world better by being better informed and understanding what is out there and what's happening? I wanted to start this by talking about, I am a specialist when it comes to media literacy education, and as is Vitor, but there is someone who really focuses on the look at how ecology and media go together. And so there is a term that we connect to it. It's called eco-media literacy, and it is coined by Antonio Lopez, who is a US citizen who is living in Italy, who works at John Cabot University. So media are understood as part of and about the environment, and eco-media literacy combines critical media literacy techniques with the analytical tools of eco-media studies, which is like a lot of words to say, how does the media inform us and look at the climate, and how do we relate back to it? We also, in this space, look at the media itself, who we are as media consumers and users of the world around us. So one thing that we know is that media has always had a really interesting portrayal of climate change. Some of it is very much like it's not happening, and then some of it is it's definitely happening and it's the end of the world. In fact, I think we probably have seen more I'm going to say that wrong, apocalyptic movies in the last several years about it, because this is something of concern. It is on the top of people's minds. And recently, the media coverage of it has substantially increased. This was just the Washington Post did this thing in 2019 about 24 magazine covers about climate change. And in doing so, really referencing like, this is the world. It's burning. We have so much going on. How do we, contradict people who don't see climate change or are climate change deniers? Understanding the myths behind that, which is very much a media literacy lesson. And this idea of, are we willing to change? And what does that mean? What's the evolution of change mean when we look at the environment and look at how we function within the media and when we talk about these kinds of things? We know it's happening. And, there is something to, I don't always want to completely shut down people who say, well, this is about cycling, which I think in part it is. But it's much more now than just cycling when there are so many things happening. New York City was under a shroud of yellow, I don't even know, shamas, they were literally falling onto our cars. And this is something that I've experienced in Portugal. I've been in Portugal several summers where the fires are burning so hot that I wake up in the morning and I'll be in the northern part of Portugal and I will wake up to just the burn, I'm having
The
trouble.
smell. Well, it's like the smell and the cloudy. It's like you woke up in doom.
Yes, it feels.
California has had that too. Yes.
Yes, right.
Yeah.
And I think actually right now you're having the other end of it, which is you've had the tsunami end of it, where there's been a lot of rains and different places there that haven't had rains in years. They don't even know what to do because they're flooding. And interestingly enough, I remember several years ago, Texas was in a drought, and I had just gone to Austin, Texas, and had stepped out, and it had rained, and people were sort of thrown by the rain. And I got to my hotel, and it hadn't rained in so many years that the hotel had sort of adapted to the no rain, so that when it rained, there were cracks happening in the hotel, and they had buckets everywhere to catch all of that.
That's insane.
That is insane, right? Exactly. So you don't think about those things and its impact, and there is impact. And I think there's a lot to discuss about how the media contributes to the lack of dialogue and perhaps the dialogue, even the role of conspiracy theories around this. For many, many years, the media climate change conversation was actually non-existent. In fact, over a 38-year period, there were only 600 news articles that mentioned climate change. For the mass, and they're just talking about just the basic 5 kinds of things, newspapers, television, radio, all of that. And over time, we've seen an evolution of that happening. And we've also watched how the misinformation stream with it has happened, whether it's, corporate people, philanthropic actors, how they fund things, how people perceive that people who fund pieces of information are contributing to the mis and disinformation. We've had certainly when we have our political stream in the United States, there's a lot of discussion about fossil fuels and the money invested in that and so forth. And we certainly have been having lots of conversations about vehicles, electronic vehicles, and will that happen? And I actually remember just this week, there's a deadline, I think, for some kind of electronic vehicle for people to switch. And then we're not going to be able to meet it. And in fact, one of the reasons why we're not going to be able to meet it has to do in part because there are way people drive vehicles and the distance and the inability for the recharging of some of these vehicles. But that's a part of it. So we also have people who are in the influencer space who create these echo chambers where there's people who are skeptics. There's certainly people who are in the politician mode. And then it gets repeated in the public, and the cycle of mis and disinformation continues, which is incredibly problematic. The world coverage on climate change also looks very different. The global north and the global south are covering it in very different ways. And it's important to note because, the perception of climate change, the way we say it in the United States, looks very different when you're in India, looks very different when you're in China. And it's important to note because we tend to see that the way in which we see the world from a very Western culture, and the media issues and the coverage of items, whether it's climate change or other things, looks very different in other parts of the world. In fact, I was just mentioning to both of you before we started this, I was in another board meeting with a gentleman who is in India from the global south, and he just talked about how so often information is repeated and misunderstood and not well received because doesn't look the same in his country. And so this has been very true even when it comes to climate change, even when it's about looking at how information spreads or the lack of information. And so that's an important piece to note. I also think it's I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, it's not surprising that Australia has if I'm reading this graph correctly, they talk about it a lot.
Yes, right.
Because we have some friends that live in Australia, and yeah, the weather, I mean, they get the sun, talk about sunscreen use. I mean, everybody's using sunscreen there, right?
Yeah.
And they're very, very conscious of
Right.
of being outside and things like that. So, and I
Right.
remember the fires they had where people were, trying to rescue animals from the forest, and
Right.
that was
Yes.
just so sad.
I have very vivid memories actually of the koalas, because I was
Yes.
so heartbroken watching that footage of the koalas who were burning. And it was just a really, it's also a moment to realize that those parts of the world that we're talking about, the way in which we handle things makes a difference. I was just seeing recently I think it was a TikTok piece actually that was sent to me of people from Africa, firemen from Africa who came to Canada to help with the fires, hundreds of firemen from Africa. And that image was such a powerful image of what we do to help our countrymen in times of need. And we forget that. We lose that along the way. We forget how important this is. And climate change is happening around the world. It is not one dimensional. I also think it's important to think about who we are in this space, because we leave a carbon footprint of what we do when we are on our email, when we are using our technologies. And I have to credit this to a student of mine, Mariah Cruz, who last term when I said to her, she's a teacher actually, who she was saying to me, can I look at this idea of digital inequity in terms of science and the carbon footprint and who we are in terms of people and how we use this. And I thought this was so fascinating, because we don't think about our carbon footprint when we're emailing. And so she took some time and really looked at different pieces of it. How as the usage, I'm sorry, go ahead.
That's crazy.
Yes.
That slide. I mean, I think because if it's digital,
right,
then it's just not, there's no carbon footprint, right? Like how can
right.
you?
We
So I'm curious
so much.
Yeah, I'm curious how that was calculated, but we don't have to get into that, but that's nuts.
I can actually give you her references after of where she got this
Okay.
information. It was so fascinating to me, because this was what she was going to teach her students, because she learned so much out doing this. And she taught all of us, which I was completely surprised about. Oh, Vitor, can you turn off your audio?
We'll mute, yeah.
I'm sorry. Thank you.
There you
Thank you. So I was like, wow, we're at the airport. So this was the other part she did. As usage of technology increases, we need to remain aware of the potential effects on the climate crisis that already exists. So the internet alone contributes to 3.7% of the world's global carbon emissions, right? And she talked about this in terms of a climate crisis and the digital divide. I don't think anybody ever talks about this.
No, I mean,
I
guess is that because of like data centers, and I mean the internet has to be stored somewhere, right? It's not nebulous. Yeah, absolutely. That's crazy.
Tech is huge, but I think she also looked at this from the way in which we consume it as well, and how that is a part of the process. The things that we buy, the phones that we buy, and what do we do with the phones that we don't use anymore? How do we discard all those things?
Yeah.
And so like there were so many pieces of this. So she asked her students about, she did this same thing with her students where she asked them how climate change makes them feel and its effects. But there was actually a study that was done with young adults. And I found this really interesting, because I think this actually is part of what motivates the media misinformation, disinformation stream. Because if you're super anxious or afraid or you feel helpless, you're looking for the opposite kind of information to make you sort of alleviate this fear that comes with it, or the guilty part. If maybe you're a part of the problem to the issues that are happening, this is all sort of a contribution to why we live in these disinformation spaces when we don't really want to recognize some of the problems. I mean, we could say that about almost every conversation we've had over the course of the last year when it comes to media and information literacy. But this was very much a really interesting piece when it comes to the climate, because the other part was that she actually, when she did this, she looked at the studies, she found that 37% of teenagers say that the threat of climate change has impacted the location of where they'd want to attend college or where they'd want to live as an adult. And that it's starting to affect them in different ways because they're much more cognizant of what it is, what's happening in the world around us.
So,
go ahead.
Yeah, is that a decision based on, I want to live in a place that's not as affected by climate change?
Yeah.
Or, okay, because I could read that two different ways, like physically a place that, I don't want to live in Australia because I don't want to have to wear sunscreen all the time.
Sure.
Or I want to live in a place where where people have a more similar mindset to mine and care more about climate change. You know what I mean?
If you are watching all these apocalyptic movies, maybe you don't ever want to live in New York City because New York City will be the first place that gets flooded, I mean, really, so it's a mishmash of a lot of different factors, but yes. So this is also why I think it's important to really have the real honest, serious conversations about effects and what that really means. Because this idea of climate anxiety is growing in different ways. We have hurricanes. I mean, in New England, and I will say this as an East Coaster living in the United States, when we had 2 hurricanes within 6 years of each other, Hurricane Sandy, and I apologize, I can't remember the other one, but it was sort of this daunting moment for people who did not ever believe that we were ever going to have a hurricane because we hadn't had one for years. Like I think it was probably the 50s or the 60s that we'd had a hurricane that really had that kind of an impact. Sandy took out so many parts of Jersey City and so forth. So people were being confronted with things that they had not ever been confronted with. Loss of power for over a week because it took so long to get the electricity up. And oh my gosh, you can't use your technology or your tools and you don't have that. So you have to engage with people, and we don't do that normally. So now you're like in these moments where you're having some reckoning about what happens when the world gets tipped upside down. Hurricane Katrina, which is probably one of the most devastating here in the United States, was a great example of failure in many ways, of how we didn't know how to handle something of that magnitude. And then we could go all the way down and talk about, what happened in Puerto Rico and so on and so forth. So there is a lot to be said about this. And because of that, we need to have these conversations about who are we in these spaces? How do we contribute to some of this, and what can we do to make it better so that we don't become a part of this sort of digital divide where we choose to misunderstand, choose to not really think about who we are in this world based on our own technologies. So the idea of recycling e-waste, which where do we throw our products? Buy greener electronics. I know Apple just came out with a I think it's going to be a greener iPhone. And they have someone who works for them at Apple who works on the greener environmental pieces. And I think it's important to know this is actually an area that's increasing in terms of jobs. This is where people are going now to sustainability. How do we change an evolution in our in the focus? I know when they were building schools around us, they had a sustainability person there so they could monitor how lights are being put in and how that was more efficient and so on and so forth. Even our homes, we're looking at how do we make our lives more efficient with our appliances and so forth. Use the cloud list to save your information to the cloud, which also, by the way, is a problem, right? Because the cloud uses energy, and so we have other ways to really think about kind of these pieces that have been a part of our lives. The other thing is something called a climate clock, which I don't know if you're aware of this or not, and I think it's interesting. So I actually captured this last week when we were supposed to have our meeting, and this is literally the countdown. This is called the countdown to I don't want to say the end because that sounds so, but really where I was like, wait, where am I going to go with this? But what I want to say is the countdown to where we're really in a problem space that we can't get out of. And so this climate clock, if I'll leave the website, it's real, it's live. And in big cities around the world, they actually have it out so that you can see the countdown happening because it talks about the renewables, it talks about global warming, it talks about all these things. And it's really important to at least be aware that we need to do something. We need to be a part of the solution piece. And whatever media choices we select to get our information, there has to also be an understanding that we are a part of this process. And this is not happening just in one space. It's happening in all communities everywhere around the world.
Who did you say runs this clock? Because I will say, I think a lot of people would probably look at this and be like, oh, that's just like Y2K, right? Y2K, everything was going to implode. And I remember, on that night, my friends and I were standing at the window, like waiting for something to happen, and nothing really happened. And so this is a little, it can come across as being doomsday-ish, if you will.
Sure.
Right.
But actually, we do have a doomsday clock, but I'm not going to talk to you about that. Right. There is a doomsday clock, which actually is kept. It's kept globally around the world, and it's based on things like wars and so forth. But I'm sorry, I'm actually on the page just so that you can see it. This is the area, and it's run by it's run by scientists, artists, and educators and activists around the world. They support this. It's just the clock. This is based on science that they've collected. And one of the things I find fascinating is that you can actually get this clock installed in different places around the world to really look at, how sustainability, what kinds of things we have to do with sustainability and so forth. This is something that is used even by the UN. So it is a pretty legitimate site in terms of that there's a global ambassador, Jerome Ringo. And so it's something that has been discussed and talked about quite often. And I'm not a doomsdayer when it comes to stuff. When I saw the clock the first time, I remember being like, oh, don't show me the clock. Like, that's really not what I want to look at right now. But I've always known about the doomsday clock because if you watch a lot of television shows, they've talked about it. And in fact, when the war in Ukraine happened, they moved it a couple of seconds, which I thought was really, really interesting because it's really based on, the things that we do in society and how much we contribute to the problems in it. And things that, and it's a preventative method as well to remind us that we have opportunities to keep changing things and making things better. So let me go back to here so that we get away from the climate clock.
Dun, dun, dun.
But I wanted to just add this sort of reflection into this because this is Socrates. Opinion is really the lowest form of human knowledge. It requires no accountability, no understanding. The highest form of knowledge is empathy, for it requires us to suspend our egos and live in another's world. It requires profound purpose, larger than the self kind of understanding. And I think this is one of those things where this, as a global issue, for which I also think media literacy education is a global issue, it means that we're all participating in these discussions. It doesn't allow for people to step out and not be a part of the solution. It really is about putting us all in there. A couple of years ago, this movie came out called Up. It's based on truly possible events, is what they said. And I remember we had several meetings about the movie because we wanted to show it to students. And of course, it has Leonardo DiCaprio and Jennifer Lawrence. But I think what I found really fascinating about the movie is, yes, it talks about this whole thing is what can we do to make the world better, but it's also about how media sources represent the climate and the cultural breakdown that adds to that. And in fact, one of the things that I did with the movie is when we discussed it with our students, we asked them, can you see the different news sources and how realistic are they to what we see in the world? And it turns out that they could see it very much. And then the question also is, how can you as an individual be part of the solution and not a part of the problem? So, and there's a lot of advocacy work that also comes with, I think, media literacy education in many ways. And in my part, and I think for Vitor as well, our jobs in being advocates in media literacy education is really about getting people to think, to really think about stuff, to pause before sharing information, pause and really be reflective. And I'll tell you, somebody who I think speaks to that often is António Guterres, our United Nations Secretary General. This is obviously a big platform for him. He talks about climate change a lot. He also talks about mis and disinformation quite a bit too. He has said climate change is the defining issue of our time, and we are at a defining moment. And I think we're at a defining moment all the time, I don't think it's just one time,
Mhm.
but this was his words to on Earth Day this year. If I had to select one sentence to describe the state of the world, I would say we are in a world in which global challenges are more and more integrated and the responses are more and more fragmented. And this is not reverse, it's a recipe for disaster. Now, if one looks at global politics and geopolitical tensions with the global economy, the megatrends, climate change, the movement of people, digitalization, the truth is that they are more and more interlinked, interfering more and more with each other. And indeed, the problems are global, but the responses are fragmented.
Mhm.
And I think that's a real truth to a lot of what happens when we allow the media to construct reality for us instead of us being participants in the media stream.
Right, because then you're just sort of putting band-aids on the situation,
Exactly.
to make people feel better, but yeah, it's not really addressing the bigger problem.
Right, which is also why, and I will say this because I know you and I've said, we talked about this in the beginning on our first session about, people who are in families where they don't talk to each other anymore. I actually think you need to talk to each other because you don't get to the other side until you do. And these fragmentations don't help as a collective. It just creates more brokenness. And the way forward is really to sort of figure out how to maybe agree to disagree in some cases, but also to understand that there is a lot more going on in the context, and answers for how people get to where they get has a lot to do with the media information stream they get, and let's have those conversations. With that, I'm going to toss it to Vitor, who is going to give his perspective from Portugal. So I'm going to stop sharing so he can do that. Okay, Vitor.
Hi, Evelyn. Sorry, I apologize because I'm at the airport in Madrid and there's a problem with the plane, and I'm asking someone to help me because I'm not sure when I have to leave. But anyway, I was listening to you, and thank you very much. My idea was to share with you some information regarding Europe and then Portugal. If you allow me, please let me share my screen with you. Okay, so I've prepared some information for this website. So Europe nowadays has two main objectives. Let's say the first one is the digital transition. I'll share all these links with you after. And the digital transition, it's of course about the digital technology, because this is not an era in which the technology is changing. Usually you say that we are entering a new era. So this is the main difference. And the other main change, main transition, it's related with our topic today, or today's topic, is the Green Deal. European Green Deal, and Europe is really working on it and trying to reduce greenhouse gases by 2050. And at the same time, the idea is to give all the people the same opportunities. So no place left behind, no person and no place left behind. So the European Green Deal, as you can read in this webpage, this European Commission webpage, it's also our lifeline out of the COVID-19 pandemic. So the European Commission is investing around 1.8 trillion from the Next Generation EU, and this is really something big even for the European Commission. Having in mind this transition, one of the main aims of the European Commission is to work on climate change. And this climate change, we have some information about climate change, is key, and at the same time is an area in which we have to invest in research. Research, and not only research, but also innovation. And this innovation, as you can read here, EU and international research have significantly furthered our understanding of the causes of climate change and our response options. So to limit warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, we have to act now, and all the researchers and research centers that have relation with climate change and environment are really working on it. And the European Union is really funding these projects because they are key for not only Europe, but all world, for the planet, in one word or too long. So this digital footprint, and as Belinha has just talked about, is really a main topic, and these problems are global. So if we have a look, for instance, at this news story from Euronews. Euronews is an European TV that shares information about Europe, and focusing on tech sector. They say that tech sector could account for 14% of global greenhouse gas emissions by 2040. So 2040. So it's important to change, to invest, to innovate, to do some research, because otherwise the tech sector is at the same time important to develop the world and to do some research and innovation, but at the same time the digital footprint is huge, and it's important to invest in this area. Having in mind this topic and going to the European Commission webpage, European Commission tells us that, however, we need to ensure that digital technology will not consume more energy than they save. At present, digital technologies account for between 8 to 10% of our energy consumption and 2 to 4% of greenhouse gas emissions. So maybe when we look at these numbers, they are small, but at the same time, it's big. If you read the next paragraph, you can have an idea. Extending the lifetime of all smartphones by just 1 year will save 2.1 megatons of CO2 per year by 2030. And this is equivalent to removing 1 million cars from our roads. Switching from 4G or 5G networks can reduce energy consumption by up to 90%. So these are really important areas of investment and research. One of these areas, and focusing now more on research, is the Creative Europe. The Creative Europe program is one of the main programs regarding funding research funding in Europe. And the European Commission, at the same time that is investing, and as you can see here, the Creative Europe program has from 2021 to 2027 a budget of 2.44 billion compared to 1.47 billion in the previous program in the last 7 years, from 2014 to 2020. At the same time, the idea is to help the researchers and to support researchers in order to, so they can implement projects that are more greener, that respect the environment. This is not easy, but everyone is trying to find best or better solutions. One of these ideas is to organize a kind of book, a book that can help researchers developing this greener project. This report is a report from 2022. Let me just make sure that this report is from December 2022, 9 December 2022. And the idea is how can we support researchers in order to develop projects that can be innovative, that can change also research. Let me just check this. have not all the conditions that I need. Sorry, I apologize, but I'm looking for page 105. Okay, let me know. So the strength and weaknesses of as well as opportunities and threats for the green and creative Europe. We just show you something that is the key area from the support. Strengths. Many existing initiatives, actions, and resources of the program can build on across sectors. There is a strong willing and readiness within the European Commission and sectors to go ahead and green their sectors. But we have a lot of weaknesses, lack of coordination and exchange, lack of green monitoring data, lack of consistent steering by inclusive criteria. Of course, there are some opportunities, traits, and so I would say that we are in a moment that we don't know which is the best way. So we are finding a way that is the more balanced possible way. In terms of Europe, and the next page we have also some information. What next? Towards the green creative Europe. So several key principles are available to this document. This document that I will share with you after. But the idea is follow a gradual progression. So the green transition of the creative Europe needs to be gradual. A progression of different speeds, so not the same speed for every sector, every area. We need an inclusive approach. The green transition of the Great Europe program cannot be achieved without the buy-in, participant voices of the CCS operators. An holistic approach at the same time supports a range of culture and media subsectors. A combined bottom-up and top-down strategies or approach, and achieving an organic transition. Of course, I would say that, okay, we have already some ideas and in general what we should do, but at the same time, we keep discussing. This is, in a nutshell, one idea of what Europe is trying to do and trying to change in order to answer to these challenges that we have are facing now regarding change and environment in general. And what we are doing in Portugal. In Portugal, of course, we are following the same ideas that Europe is sharing with all the member states. But even before, we had already some ideas, for instance, regarding here, sorry, it's this document, sorry. We have a national strategy for citizenship education, and this national strategy that I have shown before in previous PALCUS is organizing different areas, and this is our 17 areas. We have here the areas. Let me just okay. These are the main areas in which the school project, for instance, and the school subject that is called citizenship and development must focus. We have human rights, gender equality, interculturality, but sustainable development. And this sustainable development and environmental education, it's really focused on climate change, because as Billing has just shown us, young people are they are really interested in discussing and in trying to find solutions and trying to position themselves regarding this main subject. And we have a referential. This is not in English, and I apologize for that. We have a kind of a framework in terms of education for development. And this is education for development. I will share this document also with you. And I hope that we can have it in English as soon as possible. It's from preschool to secondary school. And the idea is to help teachers discussing and organizing activities with students, pupils, and students in order to develop projects and to allow them to discuss these subjects at school. Not only discussing, but also trying to act not only at the school level, but at the community level. This is the main objective of this framework that the European sorry, that the Ministry of Education, the Portuguese Ministry of Education, developed, and they are of course sharing all the results and information. Let me just check if I can find this way. Okay. They are sharing with other countries in Europe. For instance, there are 6 main areas or six global issues that they are discussing, or they are inviting teachers to discuss with children: development, globalization, poverty and inequality, social justice, global citizenship, and peace. Because these subjects are related, having in mind what we can do regarding climate change from a school point of view, having in mind.
So
then
is
we
this
have,
just a question, a quick question?
Just a question,
Uh,
a quick question.
Is there something that has already been implemented, or is it going to be?
no, it's being implemented since 2017. So we have national curriculum, a new national curriculum that was published, I think it was the 6th of July 2018, and this strategy, this digital citizenship strategy is from November 2017. So starting from September 2018, we started, not in every year at the same time,
Mhm.
but now, yes, we are implementing this strategy at the school level in all schools in Portugal. So in Portugal, our schools are organized in school clusters, and we have 810 school clusters. And this strategy, we have a national strategy, but each school cluster has an own strategy regarding citizenship, regarding these 17 domains.
I was just curious what the results then have been, because I'm remembering building a slide that showed how teenagers, like, anxiousness was the top metric, right? Now I know that was, I think, a US survey, but I'm wondering if there's a sort of a parallel with kids that have gone through this curriculum. Are they now more anxious about climate change, and how are they feeling? Or they feel more in control, that they can actually do something, in how they live their lives, or what they choose to do as a job, or whatever. So I'm just curious what the results so far have been.
Okay, we have no results framework by framework. We have only general results, of course, and I am not able to I have not enough data to answer to your question, which is a very important question, and thank you very much for that, Angela. But in general, we can say that the Portuguese students are at least more aware. Of course, they are more anxious, but this is a problem, because more general problem, because anxiety, they are more anxious because not only climate change, but the pandemic changed completely. The most recent study that I read about, 35% of our students are suffering from psychological problems, at least, and this is a huge problem. So anxiety.
So this is in Portugal.
This is in Portugal, yes. But maybe there is
I think a lot of
more.
people would find that
Today,
surprising. We always feel like, oh, we go to Portugal for art therapy. We go to Portugal, it's better there, right?
Maybe
So
it's better, but we have problems. And today we are discussing here in Madrid about these problems. And for instance, 3 in 10 children in Spain are suffering because they belong to families that are living in poverty, for instance.
Okay.
And the pandemic has something to do with that too. And there are a lot of different social problems that are related with, and you should have this in mind. But I will ask the Ministry of Education, and maybe this is a very good area to develop some research, asking children about climate change, having in mind the framework that teachers are developing in some schools. So.
Yeah, because I think it's important to balance awareness with also, but here's what you can do about it, because it's one thing to freak kids out. If we don't do something about the climate, it's gonna, our world's gonna just be destroyed. And so you've got, little kids that are, oh my God, my family's gonna die if I don't recycle this carton, right? Kind of thing.
Right.
So, Billing, you talked a little bit about kind of question everything before you completely believe it, before you share it. And I think people are wondering, yes, I can question it, but then how do I validate it? Right. Like, so I don't
Right.
know if you have any suggestions on, where people can get truthful information to help validate, and then also share, if they are going to share information with their kids, how to make them aware without freaking them out.
Well, first off, I'm a product. Vitor, I'm sorry, I'm going to have you turn off your audio again. Sorry. I'm a product of the Cold War years. So if you remember, we always thought we were going to the nuclear age and everything else. It was going to get. We just didn't know what was happening with Russia at the time, which is interesting to think. Here we are in 2023, and
building a bomb shelter
and having the same question, right? And if you go back, you can remember in the 40s and the 50s, the drills where people were under the desk for an atomic bomb, which I don't know who thought that was a good idea. Right.
Makes you feel better, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But I think the reasonable part of us has to just have reasonable conversations, right? I think the problem is that the media hypes things in a different way. And I think there's also a push to hype more of the climate piece, because there's why aren't people recognizing it? Or, why are people not having a better discussion? So I think all you do is you start from within, and you have conversations about how you can do certain things in your house to make things better. And then how that adds to contributing to making the world better. And so it's little steps, especially with children. You don't want to make them fearful of the world, because this is evolving with also the things that are happening politically, right? And, who decides what, and are we going to go towards fossil fuels? Are we taking away fossil fuels? Are we doing the wind technology? Are we doing, there's so many things, and there are people working on this every day. And so I always say, remind them that there are always people who are working towards this. A little bit like Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, to be honest with you. I think in his loveliness for people who have never grown up with Mr. Rogers, in his loveliness, what he really did was try to tell children just to remember there are always people who are working on this, always, in bad ways, and the bad things and all that, so that not to lose hope. And so that's where I would go with that. And in terms of finding information, I'm always telling people you have to look at it from more than one source. Even if, it doesn't matter if you're a CNN viewer, a Fox News viewer, or an NBC. To be honest with you, they're all spinning it. And, I was just in Portugal with Vitor. Gosh, it's already been a month. I don't know where the time went, but over a month. But the thing about it is that they're having these conversations as well. Like you have to look at multiple sources. You have to see how different people are interpreting the media message. That's part of, I think, who we as consumers, who we as future, citizens in whatever country you're living in, you're part of the stream that must be proactive in getting information. You don't get to sit on the sidelines any longer. And because there are so many sources now coming to you, TikTok, Instagram, all these other social media sources, which is really where our youth are at. We also have to recognize that they're not getting their media information in traditional routes. So for all the things that people are getting all crazed about when it comes to Fox and CNN, I can tell you my college students are not getting it from there. They'll tell me often they're not getting it from traditional media. I do think it's a little different overseas, because one of the things that I found fascinating when we were at different college campuses, the number of people who said, no, I read newspapers still. I read, Agência Lusa materials. I read, the RTP journals, but I think that, or they watch RTP or whatever it may be. So I think it's interesting that is still culturally a part of it. But in the US, I think we're culturally a little bit more separated because we use our social media in this way. So verify, check, don't hit the share button just because the story is, there. This week, and this is an American actor, Treat Williams, passed away. He was in a television show that I had watched years and years ago, and I found out about it through Twitter. And it was literally, rest in peace, Treat Williams. And the minute I saw that, I was like, okay, is this real or is this something else going on? And I automatically went to look, and it was a real story. And I think that's something that we have to be able to do, because a lot of people will want to grab your eyeballs, grab your attention with shocking headlines and just different things that they think will grab you in a personal way. Yeah. And you have to take a step back and literally look at it and say, maybe I need to just verify that before I tell someone that.
Right. And I'm thinking we probably could have done a 6th episode on this, about what they're calling the independent media. Right. Oh, yes. So all of these new YouTube news shows, podcasters who are essentially individuals, and maybe they used to be on a news network news show, or they just have sort of become self-proclaimed pundits, right? Yeah. Because and a lot of people are following them. I will say, myself included, because they offer a different perspective. Sometimes it feels a little more balanced. Right. And maybe you think, well, maybe they're telling me the percentage of the truth they're giving me, it's a higher percentage of the truth than what's being spinned, So I don't know, but that could be something to talk about as well.
Absolutely. Well, I wanted to so I'm glad you actually said that, because I kind of wanted to end with this, because we did cover a lot. These 5 episodes have covered, from civic society to cybersecurity to health, and now the science piece on, the climate. And I really want to thank you and PALCUS and my colleague Vitor Tomé in Portugal, who jumped in to do this, because I think this is, to me, I think this is one of the most important ways in which we can help ourselves, is to become educated about the media. And it doesn't have to be politicized. It just has to be about understanding how information is transmitted and how we consume it, and what we can do to be more thoughtful about it, and then thoughtful in the way in which we engage with other people. So I want to thank you for hosting these series in the last year.
It was great. And well, thank you to both of you for being willing to do it and providing such great information. We were happy to be the platform, but you guys did all the work. So thank you.
Thank you. So we can, at some point,
thank you, Angel.
We hope to see you again in other ways. So perhaps we'll have other discussions. Maybe we will do something about citizen news at some point.
Yeah, I would love to do that. But I think, our plan with this series is to draft up some sort of summary and publish that via our newsletters and perhaps on our website as well, just so that, this great information isn't lost, but it's front and center for people, and they can know that all of these episodes are recorded and available to them at any time on our YouTube channel, and also via our mobile app, because our YouTube channel is streamed through our mobile app. So I would say thank you again to both of you. This has been really wonderful. Thank you to everyone out there who has joined us for this series. If you have other suggestions for topics that kind of related to this, or maybe completely different, that you think that we should cover, please let us know. You can send us an email at palcus@palcus.org. And if you felt that this was a really valuable series, and our webinars in general are valuable, we encourage you to become members of PALCUS. It starts at $50 a year, and it allows us to do these kinds of things at no cost to the community. So we really need that kind of support, and you can join easily online and sign up for our newsletter and everything to stay current on new episodes and new webinar series that are coming. So with that, I'll just say thank you again to both of you. This has been really awesome, and I really appreciate it. And yes, we will definitely be working together again. Safe travels to both of you. I know you guys are flying back and forth all the time. And until next time.
Yes,
you very much. Obrigada.
thank you. Obrigada.
Ok, obrigado.